Any movie that starts with a disclaimer like, no animals or birds were harmed during the making of this film, horses, oxen, birds, tigers, wolves, bears, leopards, deer, fish, and snakes shown in the movie are all computer generated, is exactly the kind of movie that I want to see. I recently watched the movie RRR. It is a movie on Netflix made in South India, and it was by far one of the wildest action movies I've ever seen in my entire life. It is absolutely insane, totally wild, but a very, very good time. However, one of the things I haven't seen in all of the dialogue around the movie is the way that the movie handles firearms. Now, like 6 minutes into the movie, I saw a Webley self-loader, and I knew that this movie was just going to be wacky with the guns it used. And in India, it kind of makes sense. So this movie takes place in 1920 in India, and during that time, India was ruled by the British Empire. And this movie is about some people who rebelled against the British Empire in order for India to gain its independence. Now, something else that's really interesting about this film is that it's fairly pro-Second Amendment, probably without even knowing it, seeing as how it was made in a place very far away from the United States. But there is so much we can talk about with this movie, and I want this video to be something that you guys can absorb and enjoy. So we're just going to talk about how guns are handled in the movie, and some of the different weird firearms used, and some of the interesting scenes that happen. Let's get into it. Now, the first about hour and a half of the movie is the bromance between Bheem and Raju, and we don't quite understand the gravity of this scene until much later, but we see the introduction of one of the most prominent firearms in the film, which is the Lee Enfield No. 4 Mark I. Now, what's interesting about the No. 4 Mark I is that it is incorrect for a No. 4 Mark I to be in India in 1920. The No. 4 Mark I was not adopted by the British until beginning in the 1930s, but it didn't see full-scale use until all the way in World War II. You're going to see me using this rifle a few times in this video because this is the one that I own. This is an Ishapur 2A1, which is an Indian No. 1 Mark III made in the 1960s, I think. Yeah, 1966. This one is chambered in .7.62, but it's almost identical to that one aside from the different magazines. In fact, there's even a lot of parts compatibility between the two rifles. So they are using a No. 4 Mark I, which has a different sight, and you'll notice that the nose cap is different on that rifle. On the No. 4 Mark Is, the nose caps are further back, shorter, and then the barrel actually extends out of the nose cap a little bit. Since this movie happens in 1920, no No. 4 Mark Is should be in the film. It should only be No. 1 Mark IIIs. But I'm not going to bring it up every single time it happens because it's probably used predominantly in the film over the gun that should actually be there. It's not a huge difference, and most people probably didn't even catch it. One of the other interesting weapons we need to talk about in this film is the leopard that Bheem throws at another man. I don't think that leopards have ever been a standard issue weapon in any military anywhere in the world. In one of the scenes that I was most interested to talk about in this video, there's a scene where Raju is sabotaging some Enfield rifles. So, even though this isn't a No. 4 Mark I, they are similar enough designs that this will work to make the point. So he pulls out the bolt, and the way you do that is you pull the bolt back, and then rotate the piece that's on the side. Then he uses a pair of pliers to break off the extractor. Now, the extractor is this little piece right here, right there, and it seems that he snaps the claw right here so that it won't be able to grab the back of the round. So, presumably, he did this so that the troops cannot fire their rifles. I'm going to use these blue rounds to demonstrate because they're easy to see. Okay, so if I have 2 of these loaded into the gun, the extractor is what, when I pull this back, pulls the old round out of the gun, and then the new round will be able to go forward and in. So without that extractor, the rifle will fire once and then will not load the second round. Now, what's interesting about this is later in the movie, when the soldiers go to fire the rifles, they don't work. And this is not how this type of thing would actually happen. Like I said, you'd be able to fire once. But most likely, the people who made this movie aren't familiar with the ins and outs of firearms, and so they think, okay, well, if we break a part off of the gun won't work. Maybe if you're familiar with firearms, you've had an extractor break on you in the past. Now, what's more interesting than that is how a soldier fixes his rifle after it breaks in this way. He slaps the side 2 times, and then he grabs his pliers that he has on him for some reason, and twists the safety, it looks like, or twists a screw that's near the safety. I don't have a No. 4 Mark I, and the safety is one of the things that's a little bit different between the 2 designs. But he plays the safety with pliers, and then it works again. So somehow the broken extractor damaged the safety. But again, it's people who don't know firearms who are making a movie, and those are the kind of mistakes that happens when you do that. Now, if I was sabotaging Lee Enfield rifles, what I would do is pull the bolt out like he did, pull the bolt head off. I would snap the firing pin tip off right there. And then it wouldn't be able to fire even one shot, and the only way to fix it would be to replace the firing pin. Now, a firing pin isn't in a standard soldier's kit for most rifles, so he would need a full armorer to do that. One of the other guns featured a few times in this film that we should talk about is the Webley revolvers. So that was the revolver that the British used during World War I. Now, Webleys are a top-break revolver, meaning that they open like that, and then you load in the rounds from the top and then close them up again. This one isn't a Webley, but it is a top break, so it's still pretty cool. Okay, now, we have to talk about that prison break scene, because it is probably one of the absolute craziest things I have ever seen in an action movie. So Beam is carrying Raju on his shoulders because Raju has hurt legs, and they are shooting guns while they're on each other's shoulders. Absolutely awesome. But before we can talk about that, we need to talk about this rifle that appears in a couple of scenes in the movie, this being one of them where I think it's the clearest. Now, it appears to be some sort of drill or training or like a toy rifle you would give a child. Like, it looks vaguely like a number 4 Mark I, so it's probably why they used it in this movie, because you need to slow it down or pay a lot of attention. It's one of those things that the naked eye, to the average person, probably you're not going to notice, but I'm pretty sure that it's not a real gun. If you know otherwise, I would love if you left a comment down below and I'll pin it, but I just can't quite place exactly what this is, but I know it is clearly not a Lee Enfield. I'm pretty sure it's a drill or a training rifle that's just meant to kind of look like one for training troops in the early parts. Now, although this scene of him spinning around on his shoulders, shooting this rifle one-handed is really, really cool, this is a bolt-action rifle, or it's mimicking a bolt-action rifle, and so you can't just keep on pulling the trigger. The way that this works is that, okay, strike's closed, nothing's in the chamber. All right, I fire one shot, and then I need to cycle the action, and then I can fire my one shot again, and then I need to cycle the action and fire my one shot again. So you can't just keep on pulling the trigger as he does in this movie, spinning it around. Although, this scene is pretty awesome, so we'll let it slide. You can definitely hold one of these rifles one-handed, and granted, I'm not a superhuman who can throw a tiger at somebody, but these rifles are really heavy, and specifically really front-heavy. They're pretty long, so this would be a hard maneuver to pull off, especially with 2 of them from a man's shoulders. But, again, I'm not a superhuman who can throw tigers, so I'm not really going to talk. Now, I absolutely love this scene where he cycles the bolts, because he drops the rifles down, and then Beam reaches around the left-handed one, and cycles it with his left hand like this. And then the other one he can just do straight forward. It's a little easier for him. But he doesn't really need to cycle the bolt, because as we've demonstrated, these bolt-action rifles just fire as long as you pull the trigger in this movie. But still, this scene is just really cool. You can tell that they put love into this scene, even though they don't necessarily know all the ins and outs and workings of the firearms. Now, Beam crushes up some herbs and puts them on Raju's legs so that he can walk again, and then they are fighting all of these British troops inside of a forest. The part where he grabs the bow and puts a grenade on the front of the arrow is so cool. Now, I am no expert, nor am I an Indian revolutionary, but I do not think you could put a 2-pound weight on the front of an arrow and expect it to fly in the direction you intend. Now, a couple more interesting weapons to talk about in the film. The first one is that the bad guy of the movie is using a Martini Henry with a scope on it. This is a pretty interesting rifle. It was definitely used, not necessarily during this time period, but definitely in the country years prior. So it's possible that one could have been there, and they're pretty cool. It's just a single shot, lever action. And then the final weapon that we need to talk about that, again, I am no expert in, is the weapon of music and dance. Now, there are several times in this movie that dance is prominently used, and I can't really give that a review aside from that it made this movie a lot of fun to watch. So, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed watching this film and making this video. I would love if you guys went out and watched this movie and told me what you thought if you haven't seen it yet. And please stick around and subscribe for the future. All of that being said, I'm 8mm Mauser Man, and I watched a crazy South Indian action movie. But I lived on.
Which proves It's hard to get the best of a man named John.
Named John.